it's helpful to think of like controllable seasons and uncontrollable seasons, and then rhythms of your industry or your business, right?
Welcome to the Feast Over Famine podcast. On this podcast, we're navigating the tension that we find where mission and profit collide. We're talking to CEOs, founders, executive directors, impact investors, and all of what we've identified as the global ecosystem of the social enterprise, business for transformation, business as mission landscape. We're talking to them about the obstacles they face, the strategic challenges they've been through, how they're funded, how they were started, and everything that's happened in between. We are trying to share their story in a way that's impactful to help us all to grow the social enterprise space for the better. Enjoy this week's episode with your host, Ryan Mahaffey.
All right, everyone. Welcome to another week of the Feast Over Famine podcast. Really excited you guys are here, and we've really enjoyed this this series on burnout and recording it. And so last week, if you listened to the episode, that was part one on our how to recover and recognize and manage burnout, especially when you're in kind of a servant-hearted type of role, or you're serving others or doing something that is a little different. And so this is applicable across the board. But last week we tackled what is burnout, how to recognize it. We talked through the first 5 of our list of ways to kind of manage burnout, stay away from that and deal with it and all those things. And so this week we are tackling part 2 of this series. And so we're going to dive right back in with Erica and myself on that. And we're going to talk through the next 3 or so of these bullet points. A really cool conversation. Like I said, we both really enjoyed putting this together, and we hope it's super helpful, and we're really excited to be getting this out there. So enjoy, and we'll be back up next week with part 3.
Okay. Jumping to number 6 now. 6th way to avoid burnout is to keep healthy, keep physically, emotionally, relationally, mentally fit, whatever that looks like in your life. But really just looking at that instead of waiting to burn out and then start those habits and try and recover, think about what it looks like to be fit and healthy physically, relationally, emotionally right now in this season of life. And, for some people it may be, hey, I need to get a gym membership. Or other people, it may be, I need to take a class, or I need to, have a mentor, different things like that. But really realizing that we are holistic people and we've got to have holistic health is huge. I know for me, when I was serving in full-time ministry and going to school full-time, the best gift that I got from one of the parents of the youth I was serving was they gave me a gym membership for Christmas. And so it was a gym that I could go to anytime. And so literally I would get done with class at 9 p.m. and go to the gym and work out and run. And just having that ability to stay physically fit during those times when I was going relationally and emotionally and mentally really helped to balance things out. And I know, Ryan, for you, your choice is mountain biking, which is changing as winter approaches. But just staying physically fit has helped you, I think, to stay out of burnout and be able to process things as you go.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. It's, then I'll back up a little bit on that. Like when I was at Red Bull, this kind of goes to what you were saying. When I was at Red Bull, we spent some time with their what they call athlete high performance department. So like Red Bull has all these Olympic athletes like a Shaun White or, just amazing athletes, right? Lindsey Vonn, things like that. And so they had this wheel, and I can't remember everything that was on it, but it was like spiritually, relationally, psychologically, physically, diet, all these different things. And they basically said like most athletes are really good at like the fitness side of that, and maybe one other one, but you could have the most skilled snowboarder in the world. And if he or she, if their diet and maybe their relationships, like their family, or maybe they've got, just they're constantly in and out of, girlfriends, boyfriends, and just living like a crazy life on that side, that would actually take away from them becoming the best athlete possible. And so Red Bull wasn't always just focused on like, hey, how do you get better and more skilled? They were focused on the whole thing because they knew that whole picture mattered. And that was like such a cool thing that I've just taken and run with. And we've had some like executive coaching clients that I've sat down with them and said, hey, like, what does this wheel look like for you? And how does that wheel even look on your calendar? Like, is there space on your calendar for you to hit all these things? And again, to go back to the seasons, like there's some where you might be, hey, like, we just built a business or something, or this has been a really crazy season and my marriage is declining a bit, or I just don't feel like I'm as close with my spouse or something. Like maybe that's time for you to say, hey, let's work on this for a while. Or maybe it's like, man, I haven't really prioritized exercise for a while. You and I were talking earlier. I feel like for me, 2019, Caden was born, our first son. He was crazy. And then within 9 months, COVID hit, and then we bought a house and we're really focused on house projects and all that. And so like we worked out some, but I wasn't like thriving in terms of like fitness and where my goals were there. And this last year, since like June of this year, has been kind of like a work hard, but like I have a list of house projects I've just put aside because I just need to prioritize like exercise and doing adventurous outdoor exercise things, because that's like what I need after a couple of years of not prioritizing that. So I think it goes back to that seasons thing, and we're going to keep talking to those points. But yeah, I think it's super important. And I'm going to go one layer deeper. Figuring out the types of those things that work for you is also important. So some people, it might be like, hiring a coach in some ways. Some people, it might be like, giving yourself space to like rest or go on a walk or a hike or something. One example that for me, on the fitness side, is sometimes I have to decide if I need to, like, I'm kind of like a dog, like a Siberian Husky dog that just constantly needs to get energy out to be healthy. Otherwise I just go crazy. Right. And there's two ways I can do that. I can do that with people, or I can do that on my own. And there's certain days where I have to be like, okay, is today one of the days that I need to go do that alone and just enjoy being in my head and get away from people? Or is today one of those days that I really need that human interaction piece, and I'll go play ultimate Frisbee or go play basketball or something, or invite someone to go on a ride with me and talk to them. And so I even have an extra layer of it built in there of like, how specifically do I need this now for my own like mental health and those things? And so I don't know, Erica, maybe you have an example for you of like how you've drilled that down. That's maybe not related to fitness, because I'm just talking about like mountain biking and Frisbee stuff, which is my personality. But I think that's really important.
Yeah. Well, and I think for me, it's changed over time. For me, it used to be like, okay, I need a 5-mile run in every day. And I know that that's how I processed a lot of things. That gave me a lot of mental space to really think about the things that were happening so fast in my day-to-day life. But obviously, after having 3 kids, my level of fitness is not exactly where I want it to be or where it was before. And so even just that reminder of getting out and taking a walk around the block is huge. Just to be moving physically and do something, has been helpful for me. And I think for me, I have kind of an example of just relational unhealthiness. And this was just being in the nonprofit world, thinking about fundraising and thinking about serving people. And one of the things that I was really convicted of and realized was that I was really looking at people as either a potential client or potential donor way too much. And I realized like, that's not a healthy place to be relationally. Like, I just need to be able to have friends that I can just be friends with, whether they ever ask about the ministry or nonprofit, or whether they ever donate to any causes that I'm passionate about. And so I think that having those kind of red flags helped me to see like, okay, I need to schedule more time to just hang out with people and hear how I can be a better friend to them. They say to have good friends, you've got to be a good friend. And so I think that that's a huge piece of making sure that we're relationally healthy.
Yeah, it's super important. I always called it commoditizing my relationships. And it sounds like so terrible to do that. But when you're stressed about hitting a fundraising goal, and that's like, consuming you, which is okay. Like, you want to serve people, you need to fundraise at your job, you want to perform well. It's so hard to turn that off. I experienced that when I was at Northwestern Mutual as a financial advisor, because I was like pretty young and I didn't have a lot of relationships with people who had money that I could advise. Right. I was in college still. And but I wanted to be successful. And so I found myself for a season, like saying, oh, well, I'm meeting this person. Like maybe I could meet their parents or do this. And it was like, wow, I couldn't get away from it. It was always an opportunity to grow it. And so I think there's seasons where you kind of like have to do that. Otherwise you'll never be successful. And then there's seasons when not to, and there's a balance, but that's such a good point that you brought up on that part. Thanks for bringing that up.
Well, and I think it's just being aware, of knowing that, like, I mean, literally, I had an experience the last couple of weeks where our 2-month-old had a huge diaper blowout, and we were visiting a church to share about our nonprofit. And I was the kind of on the receiving end of someone's pitch and their project thing. And I just wanted to say, like, hey, time out. Like, do you see this mess that I'm holding on the back of my son's outfit? And he's upset. And, I'm trying to get things cleaned up so that I can go present and share about our nonprofit. And this person was totally unaware to the circumstances. And it was almost like they felt like they just had to check their box of getting their pitch done.
Yep.
And I just, when I was on the receiving end of that, I thought, oh man, please don't ever let me treat people like that, because it was so awkward. And honestly, it made me not really want to engage further in this person's project because of how they were so unaware of the circumstances around us.
Yeah. And that could be an example of like, if you're burnt out and there's some trends in here, it's going to affect your work and how you show up amongst people and how people view you and just all that kind of stuff. So in some ways, like sinking into these things we're talking about and doing them well is actually going to lead to more success in the long run, because it's just a healthy way of doing things and people are going to pick up on that. They're going to want to work with you and all those things. So I think that's definitely an example of that.
Awesome. Okay. Well, we've been saying the season word a lot. So number 7 here is just to know that there will be seasons. And here we're talking more about your business, your nonprofit, your ministry versus your personal life. So obviously starting a business or starting a nonprofit, it looks totally different the first couple of years than it does from year 3 on. Ryan, I know you know this from starting a business, and I know it from starting a nonprofit and being involved with some church restarts. But just looking at those seasons of where you're at in terms of work and ministry and nonprofit work, so that you can say, okay, this is a season where, I'm going to have a couple late nights a week and I'm going to have to go 100% now, so that in 3 years, I don't have to keep those late nights going and work. You're still working hard, but you're not working quite at the pace that you are in those first couple ones. So I think knowing the season allows us to be able to say, okay, for this month or this year, this is what it's going to look like. Because we've all known those people who say, oh, it's just a season, but you look back after 20 years and it's season after season after season.
Yep.
And
they're always busy.
Get out of that. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. If people ask how you're doing and you've been answering, oh, I'm so busy for the last year or 2 years or 3 years, and it never changes, like that would be an issue. And I've been there where I'm like, oh, I'm so busy. I think we're getting away from, as a culture, like there was probably a 10 year period there that was celebrated. It was like, oh, well, if you're not busy, then, you're not trying hard or whatever. So it was like a badge of honor to say, oh, I'm just so busy. And I think we're getting away from that. I hope we stay away from that, because I don't think that's helpful. But yeah, the seasons are really important. And I think it's helpful to think of like controllable seasons and uncontrollable seasons, and then rhythms of your industry or your business. Right. So we've noticed a rhythm for Feast Over Famine that is like, hey, the summer is kind of a tough time for that. People want to press into stuff. Like we get a few clients over the summer, we get a few referrals, we work on a few things, but people are always traveling and all that. And I know churches are similar, like people are traveling in the summer and on vacations and all this. And it's just kind of an interesting, weird time. But as the school year picks up, like for kids, it's also kind of a rhythm where a lot of people kind of settle back in and do like an end of year push. So like September to December. And then we know the holidays are kind of just like shut down. People aren't making a ton of decisions. It takes a couple of weeks into January for people to pick stuff up, and then people want to get rolling again. And so that's just like us getting new clients sometimes, or us talking to investors, or all that stuff. We like know the rhythms of those things happening. And so we've just kind of like as a family said, hey, September to, mid-December is going to be a busy time. And then January through like April. And we're a family who loves to be outside. We love that in the winter, but we love that more in the summer, because like the mountain biking and stuff. And we just said, wow, so I'm going to intentionally like work more during those winter months. And then in the summer, we're going to like dial it back. And so that's that's like an uncontrollable season, is kind of the rhythms of the business, right? And learning those. The controllable is saying, oh, well, then let's just control that and say like to enjoy summer and do those things and kind of rest and get what we need on that front. And that's created healthy rhythms. And so sometimes those just come in. Like if we get, 10 investors and 10 projects that all come to us tomorrow, that's an uncontrollable season. And so it's good to like say, okay, what can we take on this? Do we have the bandwidth for the next few months? Does that sound good? And to just enter into that. And that might mean you push certain things aside. But again, it's seeing what's coming at you, knowing what's happening. And I think the last piece is like talking to the other people it's going to affect about that ahead of time, and communicating that ahead of time and being on the same page. Like if you just kind of are doing these rhythms and seasons with your business, your organization, and you're not talking to and communicating and helping your family know that, your kids, your spouse, whatever. Or if you're not married and you don't have kids, like you're just other family members or just your close relationships, you're not letting them know, then they're going to be disappointed. Cause you might have a skiing buddy that you go skiing with all winter, and they're like, oh, I can't wait to be on the slopes with them, whatever. And then you're like, hey man, sorry, I forgot to tell you, like, this is just gonna be a tough season at work. I'm not even gonna get a season pass this year. And then that person's like they're like, well, I wouldn't have done this or that, or I would have planned differently. So I think it's important to just bring people into that and come up with what that is together and know what that is.
Yeah. A couple other quick thoughts on that. When I was in full-time ministry, we talked a lot about take time when you have time, because just like how you're talking about kind of the rhythms of the year for Feast Over Famine, every organization and business and church has their rhythms too. They have their time when it's busy, and then their down times. And obviously those down times are a good time to get caught up on the admin piece of things, but don't feel guilty about taking time off when things are slower. I think, because that's a huge piece where people feel like, oh man, I have to work X amount of hours, blah, blah, blah. But it's like, wait a minute, if you look at the whole year, look at how much overtime you're putting in this season. And so don't feel guilty about leaving a couple hours early, another season, and just recognizing that. And I think that another piece of it that we've talked about, Ryan, you and I have talked about this a lot, but when it's a season where you need to work hard. I think that there's a lot of people who burn out because they're going about 80% of effort over the long haul, where it's like, if they went 100 or 110% of effort for a couple years, then it's going to allow you to slow down a little bit later on. And so I think, I know you have a lot of thoughts on that specific point right there.
Yeah. And we don't have to go into them all, because you just said that perfectly. Like there's seasons to give it your all and go hard, and there's seasons not to. And like I'm 100% on the same page as you on that. And I don't know that I want to go like super deep on that. Maybe that's a whole other podcast, but just like, you can't halfway do anything, but you could fully do something and then rest. That is an option. So I think it's just important to say, what that is. And it might be helpful for people to like, sit down and write out your year, for your industry or whatever, and just kind of, or go back to your calendar over the past year and add up. I don't love adding up the hours that you're working, because I don't think that's helpful. Because like I get more insight about client projects or investment opportunities and things like that. I get more of that when I'm on my mountain bike than not, and I don't count that. That's why I don't like counting hours, because it's like, that's not helpful for me. But go and just kind of look and just be like, okay, average, where am I working more and all that, and line it out. And then And then plan out the next year and say, when am I going to go 110%? And how long am I going to do that for? Wow, I went 110% for 4 months in this season, and that didn't go so well. So maybe my bandwidth is like 2 months of that. And then I need to kind of just take a break. So plot out your year, as we're ending the year and going into 2022, think about that and think when you're going to do that. And that might be the whole year. You're like, wow, this is 110% year. I am just going to grind and go at it and nothing's going to change. So, yeah, I think there's a lot to that, but really, really good topic there for sure.
Well, and that leads us into number 8 also, of being present where you are, because we've talked a lot about working hard when you're at work, loving hard when you're at home, playing hard when you're doing your hobbies, but just being present where you're at so that you can be 100% present and engaged in where you're at and what you're doing in order to have a break from other things, but in order to succeed in whatever sphere it is that you're in, whether it's parenting and marriage and your family, or whether it's your hobby, or whether it's your work. If you can be focused and present during that time, it allows you to be more successful in being present in other ways in other times too.
Totally. I love how when we were preparing for this episode, you had that phrase like, work hard at work, love hard at home, play hard at your hobbies. And I loved that. I think that's super helpful. And yeah, just like you said, like to be present where you are. And this is one that's really hard for me. Like I'm not always good at this, and I beat myself up about it a lot. I think that's something that can lead to burnout. Like if there's some of these things, as we're talking, there might be some of these things that you're like, oh, yep, that's the one that creates burnout for me. And then if you're like me, and then you go into your head and you start beating yourself up because you suck at that one, that's just creating this same like mental cycle, and that's not helpful. So it's good to recognize that these are bad, but then also to say, okay, if I'm not good at this, like that's okay. How do I just build the support around me to do that well? And we're going to talk about that later too. But yeah, like, and I think this goes back to the season thing a little bit. You're not always going to be like in a given day, you're not always going to be able to perfectly be present at work, home, and your hobbies. It's just unrealistic. Mm-hmm. Now, when you go to a week, you can probably look at a full week, a full 7-day week with the weekend, and say, okay, like I did that okay this week. Now, that's not going to be as good as if you look at a full month, right? Or as if you look at a full quarter or a full year, right? So I think it's helpful to do that. It's helpful to say, okay, in a year, what do I want that balance to be? Mm-hmm. What do I want that to look like? Okay, let me drill that down to like monthly. Okay, in a month, I would like to, have it look like X, okay. Now there might be a week that I have to travel for work, so I'm not gonna be around my family, but then the next week I'm not traveling and I'm actually going to take a full day off in the middle of the week and be with them. I think that's more realistic to look at it that way. And I have my spreadsheet brain is coming out as I explain this, right? Of how I like put everything in buckets and try to like make it perfect on a scorecard. Something else that was helpful for me is like, I think it's hard if you have just anybody who's reliant on you for your energy. If you work all day and then you finish work and in the evening, you need to give of yourself to kids, a spouse or a partner or someone you're with, or like a parent, or anybody else, a dog, like, just be kind of kind to yourself and communicate with them, like what that looks like after you've done a full day of work, because after a full day of work, you're not going to be the same you can be on like a Saturday or a Sunday, or what that looks like. Right. And so, I know for me, if I plow through a full day of work and then I have at like, 3 PM is when I'm going to hang out with Caden, our 2-year-old, that's not as good as if I get like a full night's rest, spend the morning with him, and then work in the afternoon, because my brain is a little dead. So sometimes I'll intentionally schedule my time where I'm like, hey, I'm going to go for a mountain bike ride with the family or go for a run, early, and I'm going to start my work day later. And I have the flexibility to do that. So that's helpful, but I'm going to start later because I can give better present energy to them in the beginning of the day. And then I can do my work stuff later. And so again, this is all just, none of it's black and white. One last thing I'll say that was really helpful, that if you're the spouse of somebody, or you're in a close relationship or somewhat with somebody that's, you want to help. Like one thing Kira helped me with a couple of years ago, I guess a year ago, last winter, The winter was hard for me. I'm not the kind of dad that does really well just like sitting in the room while the kid is playing. Like I'll just, when Caden's doing that, I'm more active. I like to be out with him and hanging out with him and doing that. And so that's really hard for me. But in the winter months when it's dark and cold outside, I would finish work and then just that. And she's like, hey, if you can kind of just average like, 1 hour a day during the week that you're just focused on him, I think that's enough. And for me, I'm thinking, well, I need that to be 3 hours, or okay, today it's realistic for that to be 3. And she just gave me that permission, and that was super helpful. And that's not gonna be the same for everybody, but have somebody else give you like a guardrail sometimes in those scenarios. And for her, she's coming at that of like, hey, what is your family? She's telling me what they need as my family. And then that was relieving. So I think there's all sorts of those things. And then the play hard at your hobbies thing, like I need like something outside of all this other stuff that I'm pushing for to motivate myself, whether it's a mountain bike race or it's a Frisbee tournament or just something for me. And so maybe it's for other people, maybe it's like pursuing a degree or learning something new or getting a certificate or whatever that might be for you. Figure out what that is and always have one of those things on the calendar, because that forces you to play hard at your hobbies instead of like half-assing them, right? Because I can go on a mountain bike ride and it'd be like, oh yeah, I went on a mountain bike ride, cool. But when I have a race on the calendar, I play harder at my hobby as a result of that. And sometimes it's helpful to not have that and just be able to just do it. But I think playing hard, you have to give yourself goals on that front too.
Well, and I think too, Ryan, you've hit at a couple of things that I was also thinking about. One is just pay attention to those things that drain you and those things that fuel you. And, whether it's like a legit official categorized hobby, or if it's just something that you're like, hey, I feel more relaxed or refreshed after doing X, Y, and Z. Maybe it is cooking dinner, or maybe it's slowing down to wash dishes, or one of my favorite unofficial hobbies is crocheting and watching football. But random things like that, that's like, okay, this actually gives me more energy and refreshes me. And so I want to be able to have time for those things that do that. The other thing, Ryan, that you hit on with Kira is just, we've got to get feedback from people, because otherwise, again, it goes back to that living in a bubble. And we may think that we're working hard at work, but then we have an evaluation with a supervisor and it's like, hey, you're not up to par in these areas, or, hey, you're working too hard and need to slow down. We get immediate feedback, usually in terms of work and in terms of our hobbies. You can see if your mountain biking time or miles beat what you did the previous day, things like that. But a lot of times it's hard to quantify that at home. And so getting that feedback from people to say, hey, you haven't been 100% at home, and here are some ways that you could love me better or interact with us better or carry your weight around the house. I think it's important to ask for that feedback so that you can really be on the same page that, yes, I am being present and actually doing this well.
Yeah, I love that. It's almost like it's not realistic to have a scorecard, but put people in each of those areas and give them permission to kind of give you a scorecard and ask for that. Otherwise, people might not give it to you.
Right. Yep. Yeah. And it might not be an everyday thing, because you don't want to be constantly evaluating, but, different seasons, like just say, hey, how am I loving you? How am I doing at this? To ask and invite that feedback.
All right, everyone. Thank you for listening to another week of the Feast Over Famine podcast. We are so thankful you guys are here and listening. As always, hit that subscribe button on your favorite podcast listening apps. We would love to keep you guys up to date on new episodes that are coming out, when we're launching new episodes, when we're launching new seasons, and everything in between. So when we're in season, episodes are dropping every single Wednesday. Hit that subscribe button. Make sure you're up to date. Also, if you're loving what we're doing, be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, where we're constantly posting about our projects, what they're doing, what kinds of things we're working on. We'll recycle some podcasts, things about our partners, all sorts of fun stuff that you want to see. So hit us up on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, all that kind of stuff, and check out what we're doing there. And yeah, we're stoked that you guys are listening. We hope this has been really fruitful, and we will catch you guys next week. And lastly, as you guys all know, we always talk about all sorts of things with impact investing, investment opportunities, entity structure modeling, how projects are getting capital. And as a disclaimer and a reminder, Feast Over Famine does not provide legal, tax, accounting, or other professional advice. You should consult professional advisors concerning the legal, tax, or accounting consequences of any activities related to your project or a project you're supporting. Feast Over Famine doesn't consult, advise, or assist with the offer or sale of securities in any capital raising transaction. We don't do that for the direct or indirect promotion or maintenance of a market for any securities. And Feast Over Famine does not engage in any activities for which an investment advisor's registration or license is required under the U.S. Investment Advisors Act of 1940 or under any other applicable federal or state law, or for which a broker's or dealer's registration or license is required under the U.S. Securities Exchange Act of 1934 or under any other applicable federal or state law. So there's your investment disclaimer. Hopefully that's helpful if you need it. And if you ever have any questions on that side of things, don't hesitate to reach out to us. Take care.